Raymond Kerr's palm came down so hard on the counter that the cup of pens rattled sideways and spilled, and the two contractors browsing the aisle at the back of the store looked up at exactly the same moment. The building supply store went still. Not the dramatic stillness of a film. The ordinary, uncomfortable stillness of people who are hoping not to get involved. $1,400. Raymond pushed the invoice back across the counter, without looking at it again, the way a person returns something they found offensive. They quoted me $1,150. $1,150. That was the number. That was the number I wrote down. The woman behind the counter, Verity Ashmore, picked up the invoice. Her expression didn't change. She scanned it once, then again. I can see the discrepancy, sir. We had a system update last night that may have pulled in the wrong rate. If you give me about 90 seconds, I can get our accounts manager on the line and have a corrected invoice. No. He held up one hand flat like stopping traffic. No, you don't get to correct it after I caught it. That's not how this works. I understand the frustration. Do you? He leaned forward slightly over the counter. He was wearing a cashmere coat the color of charcoal, and he wore it the way men wear expensive things when they want you to register exactly what things cost. Because what you're describing is bait and switch pricing. I quoted $1,150 over the phone, I drove out here and suddenly it's $1,400. That is called fraud. Verity kept her voice even. It was a system error, not. I don't care what it was. He turned partly toward the store. The contractors at the back, a woman with a basket stopped near the paint samples, an older man waiting for the second register. Raymond made a small gesture, an actor who'd located his audience. Is that acceptable to any of you? Quote one number, charge another, and hope the customer doesn't notice. He shook his head slowly, the weary headshake of a man perpetually let down by the people around him. This is why people go to the big chains, because at least there, someone knows how to run a basic operation. Sir. Verity's tone didn't waver. I can fix this right now, if you'll let me. 2 minutes, that's what you said. He looked at her then, really looked at her. The evaluating look that takes a person in and files them somewhere unremarkable. The name tag, the store logo on the fleece vest, the comfortable, practical shoes. Do you know who I am? I don't, Verity said. Raymond Kerr, Kerr Commercial Group. You may not have heard of us, but I assure you the people signing your municipal contracts have. He straightened, adjusting his coat at the collar. I build things, real things. Not. He glanced at the racks of pipe fittings, the pegboard samples of laminate flooring, the worn linoleum underfoot. Not a store that can't keep its own pricing system functional. At the far end of the counter, Delia had already reached for the phone. Verity turned slightly. Can you pull the Kerr commercial account and get Terry on the line? Already on it. Raymond watched this exchange like it irritated him to be managed. Who's Terry? Our accounts manager. She'll confirm the original quote and authorize the corrected invoice in real time. Verity looked back at him. This will take about 90 seconds. I don't have 90 seconds. I have a call in less than an hour. He picked up the invoice once more, turned it in his fingers, set it back down with deliberate precision. You know what? Forget it. I'll source it elsewhere. But I'm calling your regional distributor this afternoon, and I'm filing with the Better Business Bureau. And if your owner has any sense whatsoever, he'll be having a very direct conversation with you about what it means to work a customer-facing counter. He paused. You don't own this place, do you? You just work here. Verity looked at him steadily. I work here. Right. The way he said it meant, of course you do. Then pass the message along to whoever's actually in charge, if they care. He tucked the original quote into his inside breast pocket and buttoned it closed. He looked at her one last time, not with malice exactly, but with a complete and comfortable certainty that she was exactly who she appeared to be, and that this made her unimportant. You should all be embarrassed, he said. He walked out. The hydraulic door closer brought the door shut behind him. Slow, quiet, with a small mechanical click that felt deeply wrong for the size of what had just happened in the room. 3 full seconds of silence. The contractors at the back went back to their browsing. The woman near the paint display picked up her basket and moved on. Delia stood with the receiver against her ear, waiting for Terry to pick up. Verity took the invoice off the counter, folded it into quarters, and put it in the front pocket of her vest. You all right? Delia asked, covering the mouthpiece. Fine. Verity looked down the length of the store toward the staff room door, where a framed photograph hung at eye level. A man in his mid-40s standing in front of this same storefront, squinting into summer sun, grinning like someone who still couldn't quite believe what he'd managed to build. Her father, Lorne Ashmore. He'd opened this store 29 years ago with a used forklift, a second-hand inventory management system that kept crashing, and a line of credit that had kept him awake 3 nights a week for the first 2 years. Verity had worked Saturdays here since she was 12. She still worked them now, Not because anyone expected her to. Not because the store needed her specifically. But because it was the one place in her week where nobody needed a strategic decision from her. Nobody was forwarding her a quarterly report. Nobody was waiting on her signature. Here they just needed to know if the number 10 wood screws were on the top shelf or the bottom. And whether the store carried that particular gauge of copper fittings. She straightened the pen holder back upright. Flag the Kerr commercial account for me, she told Delia. I'll deal with the rest this afternoon. Raymond Kerr's driver had him at Simcoe Tower on King Street with 6 minutes to spare. He liked that margin, enough to compose himself in the elevator, not so much that he had to stand around the reception area looking like he was waiting to be noticed. He stepped off the express elevator at the 31st floor, caught a glance of himself in the mirrored doors as they parted, and followed the assistant down the hall toward the boardroom of the Infrastructure Procurement Division of the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. 14 months. That was how long he had been working toward this. The Halton Interchange Project, a $340 million public-private partnership to redesign one of the most congested highway junctions in the Greater Toronto Area. It was the kind of contract that didn't just make money. It made a company's name permanent in the built landscape of the province. Kerr Commercial's submission had been the strongest on the table. He was certain of it. His financial team had stress-tested the numbers in 6 different scenarios. His legal advisors had reviewed the proposal twice. His project director had flown in from Calgary specifically for today. The assistant opened the boardroom door. The room had a view, glass from floor to ceiling, Lake Ontario flat and gray-blue in the distance. The autumn skyline spread below like the opening frame of a pitch deck. 6 people were seated around the table, ministry representatives, 2 independent procurement consultants, a legal observer. And at the head of the table, a woman in a dark blazer, a project file open in front of her, a pen resting across the top page. Raymond stopped mid-stride. She looked up. He recognized her in pieces, the steadiness of the expression first, then the face, then the whole of it, assembled into something his mind refused for one long second to make sense of. The clerk from the building supply store in Oakville, the one with the name tag and the fleece vest and the comfortable shoes, the one he had told to be embarrassed. She was not wearing a vest now, she was not behind a counter. She was sitting at the head of a boardroom table in a building that cost more per square meter than his first development had cost in total. And she was looking at him, with precisely the same composed expression she'd had when he told her she should pass his message along to whoever was actually in charge. Mr. Kerr. The ministry representative to his left rose slightly. Please come in, let me introduce. Well, it's possible you've already met. This is Verity Ashmore, Executive Director of Ashmore Infrastructure Group. Raymond's mouth opened, nothing came out. Ashmore Infrastructure is our primary technical assessment partner for the Halton project, the representative continued. As lead evaluator on the scoring committee, Ms. Ashmore's recommendation carries considerable weight with the ministry's final determination. Verity had not looked away from him. Raymond lowered himself into the chair across from her. Beside him, his project director had gone completely still. His legal advisor was studying the surface of the table with careful, deliberate attention. Neither of them spoke. We've met, Verity said. The room held its breath. Raymond's voice came out smaller than he intended. I wasn't aware. I know, Verity said. That's generally the point. The ministry representative cleared his throat. One of the procurement consultants looked at her pen. Before we move into the evaluation discussion, Verity said, I'd like to take a few minutes to give this committee some context. Raymond felt the temperature in the room change in a way that had nothing to do with the thermostat. Earlier this morning, I was working a Saturday shift at Ashmore Building Supply. It's the original store, the one my father opened in Oakville in 1996. I work shifts there when I can. It keeps me connected to where this company started, and it gives me an unobstructed view of how people conduct themselves when they believe the person across from them doesn't matter. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't inflect. She spoke the way a person speaks when they've already done the emotional work and what remains is simply factual. Mr. Kerr came in this morning to collect an order. There was a pricing discrepancy, a system error that would have taken 90 seconds to correct. Instead, he accused the store of committing fraud. A pause. He made that accusation in front of other customers. He suggested I was incompetent. He told me to pass a message along to whoever was actually in charge. Another pause, quieter, and before he left, he told us we should all be embarrassed. Raymond looked at the table. He couldn't look anywhere else. To be clear, Verity continued, this isn't about the personal offense. I want to say that plainly because I know how this can sound. I've run a company for 11 years. I've managed considerably harder situations than a difficult Saturday morning. She folded her hands over the file. What I want this committee to understand is that Ashmore Infrastructure evaluates partners comprehensively. That means technical merit, financial viability, and leadership character. Because how a principal behaves in low-stakes environments tells you more than any boardroom presentation ever will. One of the procurement consultants set down her pen. Kerr Commercial's submission is technically strong, Verity continued. The financial modeling is sound. The construction timeline is aggressive but defensible. She looked at Raymond directly, without heat, without theatrics. It's the leadership profile where I have concerns. And this morning made those concerns significantly harder to weigh against the technical merits. She turned a page in her file. I want to give you the opportunity to respond. That's the fair thing to do. Raymond Kerr had closed deals in worse conditions than this. He had salvaged bids that looked dead on the table. He had talked his way through situations that should have ended him. He was not, by any measure he had ever applied to himself, a man who lost his footing in a room. He looked at the table. He looked at the view, the lake, the skyline, the gray autumn sky. He looked at Verity Ashmore, who was watching him the way she had watched him from behind a worn counter, with a spilled cup of pens, as a photograph of her father on the wall nearby, and who had not flinched then and was not flinching now. I didn't know who you were, he said. The words came out before he could shape them into anything better. Verity nodded slowly. I understand that. I'm asking you to consider carefully whether that's the defense you intend it to be. Silence settled into every corner of the room. Raymond's legal advisor pressed his lips together and looked at the window. His project director had developed a focused interest in his own hands. The man who had raised his voice in a hardware store so that everyone within 15 meters could hear him was sitting in a glass tower with a lake view and had run completely out of things to say. It was the ministry representative who spoke first quietly. Raymond, this isn't the first time conduct concerns have come forward in a procurement context involving your team. You'll remember the Brampton Transit submission in 2021. We received 2 complaints from subcontractors during that evaluation process. Raymond said nothing. We didn't act on them at the time. The documentation wasn't sufficient for a formal finding. But character in procurement matters. It's always mattered. The representative glanced at Verity. We simply never had reason enough to act before. Verity closed her folder. The committee will conduct a full evaluation, she said. Every submission, including Kerr Commercials, will be scored on merit according to our established criteria. That process will be rigorous and impartial. She paused. My recommendation to the ministry will include a conduct and leadership assessment alongside the technical scoring. It always does. That's part of what Ashmore Infrastructure was contracted to deliver. She looked at Raymond one final time. There was no satisfaction in her expression. There was something more difficult to sit across from than satisfaction. A calm, complete clarity, the kind that doesn't need the other person to understand anything. You're welcome to stay for the technical portion of today's session, she said. That's your choice to make. Raymond Kerr sat for a moment. He picked up the folder in front of him and straightened it against the table. He stood. His project director began to rise. Raymond set a hand briefly on his shoulder, a small gesture that meant stay, and walked to the door alone. He paused at the frame, one hand on the edge of the door. He didn't turn around. He walked out and the boardroom door closed behind him with the same quiet, ordinary click as the one at the Oakville store had. Undramatic, final, unhurried. The Halton interchange contract was awarded 6 weeks later. The consortium selected did not include Kerr Commercial Group. The ministry's press release cited a comprehensive evaluation framework encompassing technical merit, financial strength, and leadership accountability. Raymond Kerr did not issue a public statement. There was no appeal filed. On a Tuesday in early December, Verity was working through invoices in the back office of the Oakville store when Delia knocked and leaned around the door. Someone's here asking for you, says he knows you from a meeting, brought coffee which I respect. Verity looked up, send him back. The man who appeared in the doorway was in his mid-30s, in a winter coat slightly too light for the weather, holding 2 travel cups and looking uncertain about whether he'd done the right thing by coming. Verity recognized him after a moment. He'd been at the boardroom table, on Raymond's side, the project director, the one who'd stayed behind after Raymond left. Mrs. Ashmore, he said, I'm sorry to just show up. I'm Brett Lava, I was Kerr Commercial's project director. I remember you. Verity gestured at the chair across the desk. Sit down. Brett Lavoie sat. He set one of the cups on the edge of her desk and kept the other in both hands. He looked at her for a moment the way people look at someone when they've been rehearsing what they're going to say, and have just realized the rehearsal wasn't quite right. I left Kerr Commercial 3 weeks ago, he said. It wasn't about the contract, it had been coming for a while. He turned his cup slowly. I came because I needed to say something, and I didn't think I'd find another way to do it. He looked at the edge of the desk. I was in the store that morning. When Mr. Kerr, he stopped, tried again. I was waiting in my car and then I came inside. I saw most of it. He paused for longer this time. I didn't say anything, I didn't tell him to stop, I didn't apologize to you afterward. I stood near the electrical aisle and I waited for it to be over, and then I followed him out. Verity said nothing. I've thought about that a lot. Brett looked up at her. I've worked for people like him my whole career. I told myself it wasn't my place. That it would make things worse, that you could handle it. He shook his head slightly. I don't think those were the real reasons. They rarely are, Verity said. No, he was quiet. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, directly. That's all, I know it doesn't change anything. Verity looked at him for a moment. Through the small window behind his shoulder, the December lot was gray. The forklift parked under the overhang, the stack of lumber under its tarp, the sky the flat white of a day before snow. My father used to say, she said, that the people who watch and say nothing aren't neutral. They're bystanders with better excuses. She looked at Brett. But the difference between a bystander and someone who actually learns something is what they do with it afterward. She tilted her head slightly. What are you going to do? He thought about it honestly. I don't know yet, he said. That's the right answer. She stood, extended her hand across the desk. He stood too and shook it. What's your background? Project management, infrastructure, mainly. He hesitated. I've been thinking about whether I want to stay in that lane or… Send me your CV, Verity said. Brett Lavoie looked at her like he'd misheard. Seriously? There's a difference between someone who's worked in the wrong environment and someone who's fundamentally the wrong person, she said. I'd rather find out which one is true for myself. He nodded once, picked up his cup. Thank you. Tell Delia I said the other coffee is mine, Verity said. I've been at these invoices since 7. He laughed, sudden, genuine, surprised out of him. I will. He did. Verity worked through lunch that day, the way she usually did on Tuesdays. Sandwich at the desk, invoice folders stacked on her left, the smell of wood and machine oil and cold concrete that had lived in this building since before she was old enough to remember anything else. Through the open office door at a certain angle, she could see the photograph on the wall. Her father, squinting into the sun in front of this same storefront, grinning like a man who still couldn't quite believe his own luck. She thought about Raymond Kerr sometimes, in the weeks after the boardroom. Not with satisfaction and not with regret, with a kind of practical clarity, the kind that comes when something confirms what you already understood to be true. He had looked at her and decided she was a person who didn't count, and because he had done that, he had told her everything she needed to know about how he would treat the tradespeople, the site workers, the subcontractors, the procurement liaisons, all the people who would have existed in his mind, somewhere beneath the threshold of his attention. A $340 million infrastructure project passes through hundreds of hands. The person signing the contracts and the person pouring the concrete foundation. Both need to trust that the people in charge are paying attention to the full picture. It wasn't about the insult. She had let go of the insult somewhere around the 45-second mark, when she understood that Raymond Kerr wasn't capable of embarrassment in that direction. It was about what the insult revealed. Cleanly, without ambiguity, in the plain light of a Saturday morning in a building supply store that her father had built from nothing. Lorne Ashmore had understood something that took other people careers to learn, if they ever learned it at all. That the person fixing your plumbing and the person reviewing your infrastructure bid are the same kind of person. They show up. They do work that matters. They want to be looked at when you're talking to them. That's not complicated. It's just consistently forgotten by people who have mistaken the size of their portfolio for the size of their character. Verity finished her lunch, stacked the invoice folders, and went back out to the front counter. 2 customers were waiting. A woman with a handwritten list and an older man holding up a length of copper pipe and squinting at a stamp on the side of it. Can I help with that? Verity came around. The man turned with visible relief. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out if this is the right gauge for a bathroom reno. The guy at the other place told me one thing, and the internet told me something different, so. Let me have a look. She took the pipe, read the stamp, and turned to the shelving behind her. For a bathroom supply line you actually want. She pulled a comparison piece and held the 2 side by side, explaining as she went. The store was warm, the fluorescent lights hummed. Outside, a delivery truck backed slowly into the lot, its warning signal beeping twice before it stopped. Verity Ashmore helped the man find exactly what he was looking for. Then she went back to work. There's something worth understanding about the way character actually operates in the world. Not in the dramatic moments, not in the boardroom silences or the public reversals, but in the ordinary Tuesday mornings when no one is watching and nothing is at stake. In the way a person shows up behind a counter and gives a real answer to a question about copper pipe gauges, because the work is worth doing and the person asking deserves a real answer, and that's the whole of it. Raymond Kerr never understood that. He understood leverage and positioning, and what it meant to control the narrative in a room. But he never understood that every room also contains someone who will remember exactly how he behaved when he thought they didn't matter. Titles impress people for a moment. Character is what stays. If this story moved you, don't scroll past it. Like it and leave us a comment. Should Verity have given Raymond a second chance, or was her decision in that boardroom the right call? We want to know what you think. Subscribe to Lost Soul Stories TV for more stories where the truth shows up in the places people least expect it.